Do you want to hear a joke? Okay, so a Roman goes into a bar and he says, "I would like 5 drinks, please." You get it? 5, V. Well, if you struggled with that one, you're definitely not going to get this one. A Roman goes into a bar and he says, "Give me a Martinus, please." And the bartender says, "Martinus? Do you mean a martini?" And the Roman says, No, only one." As far as I'm concerned, that is the best joke about alcohol ever. Only about 5 of you are going to get it. Brothers, sisters, comrades and friends, welcome to Bad Country. So we're going to talk about signs and red flags of creeping alcoholism today. When you Google a phrase like signs that I might have a drinking problem, you tend to first and foremost get the governmental guidelines about it, the official kind of healthcare professional position on it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Those guidelines are fine, naturally. But today I want to give you a slightly more specific first-hand experience of the signs of my own alcoholism. I'll tell you some of the signs I think that were early indicators that I had a developing drinking problem, and I hope it is useful to somebody out there. So while the official guidelines are absolutely fine and correct, I also want to give you some kind of lived experience, some insight into the signs that exist in the real world, not just in the government's world. And if it does turn out to be useful and you want to access more information like it, I really highly suggest you sign up to the Bad Country Alcoholism and Sobriety Patreon. There's a very quickly growing community of sober people over there who would be happy to welcome you. So let's start with the official advice, the official guidelines that I mentioned, just to make sure that nothing goes unsaid. They're phrased a little bit like the kinds of questions you would be asked if you were being admitted, or if you were being assessed for alcoholism. So some of these are probably going to be familiar to you. But there's something like this. Depending on the region, there'll be some variation of the following questions. Do you often drink more or longer than you intended? Have you tried to cut down but couldn't? Have you wanted a drink so much that you couldn't think about anything else? Have you been in trouble because of drinking? Have you put yourself in dangerous situations because of drinking? Have you continued to drink even though it made you feel bad? And have you had withdrawal from alcohol? So those are the kind of governmental guidelines. If you answer yes to one or more of those, then there's a real possibility you might have a drinking problem, according to the government. And they're all good questions. And I am not here, certainly not here, to criticize them. That's not my intention. But they are very broad. They feel indistinct, like they could apply to any large group of people. They lack specificity. So now I'm going to pull some more specific and more realistic signs and indicators that you might be an alcoholic, or you might have a developing alcohol problem, a drinking problem, from my own actual experience. I think I've come up with about 15 slightly more nuanced indicators than the government has provided. But I'm sure there are more. And if you have more, if I've missed any, that you think are important kind of early signs of alcoholism that are underdiscussed, please leave them in the comments so that other people searching for this information might find them. So let's get started. The first kind of slightly more nuanced indicator that you might have a drinking problem is you started to cycle the places where you're buying booze. So what I mean is that you started to buy, if you're drinking at home at least, you started to buy your alcohol from different shops. You started to alternate them day by day. And if you're drinking socially, you're going to different bars from the one you were in the previous night, so that the bar staff don't recognize you coming in. And this is, it's huge. Once you start deliberately going to different shops to pick up your alcohol and alternating which ones you're going to, that is an absolutely colossal red flag. And it is indicative of a growing need, like a feeling of needing secrecy about your drinking, of wanting to conceal the amount that you are drinking. You don't want to keep buying booze from the same shop day in, day out, because you kind of fear the judgment of the shop staff. You fear their assessment of you. You worry that they might think you're an alcoholic. And think about it like this. If you're drinking enough to be embarrassed about what the shop staff think of you, then you've got some kind of problem. And like I said, this one is colossal. It's a really, really big indicator that your drinking problem is accelerating. All of us do this. I think that's fair to say. Like, I can sense the alcoholics in the audience who've got sober kind of nodding in agreement that at some point in their alcoholic career, they started going, alternating shops and breaking up the pattern of where they were going. And if you started doing this, don't underestimate it, because it is a very real signal that you're starting to kind of spiral out. Because it's only alcoholics who do this. It's something that we all have in common, and it's something that we have in common that no one else but alcoholics does. Unproblematic drinkers don't do this. It is purely an alcoholic characteristic. How do I phrase this? No one who doesn't have an alcohol problem does this. Does that sentence make sense? Normal people don't do it. It's only alcoholics. So if you're starting to do it, you got a problem. The next one is you are lying. You started to lie about your drinking. Now, this lying, that's a pretty broad description by definition. And that's because alcoholics, including alcoholics who don't yet know they're alcoholics, which may be some of you, we are almost defined by our lying. And it doesn't have to be big, grand lies. For example, it doesn't have to include lying about being completely sober all the time. Alcoholism lying is more subtle than that, more sophisticated, more manipulative. So the lies that I'm talking about are intended to diminish how much you're drinking in the view of somebody else. These lies are designed to kind of throw other people off the scent of how heavily you're drinking. It's designed to kind of downplay your drinking, especially if it doesn't sound like you're downplaying it. Okay, this is the kind of level of sophisticated lying that I'm talking about. Alcoholism is manipulative, and it will make you manipulative. So you might, I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. You might find yourself saying things like, well, I generally just get smashed once a week, but when I do, I really, really go for it. I get really smashed. And that sounds like truth, right? That sounds like a little bit of honesty, except it isn't the truth, or at least it's not the whole truth. The actual truth of that statement is that you're drinking heavily 5 or 6 times a week. That's the truth. Admitting that you get smashed once a week and revealing it as if it is an honest admission distracts from the fact that you're trying to conceal that all the other days you are drinking heavily anyway. So lying for an alcoholic, it might not be a big, grand, delusional lie, like you're a millionaire or something like that. It might look more like the admission of a small, ugly truth in order to conceal a bigger, uglier truth. For example, I can't be an alcoholic because I don't drink every day. That is a lie by omission, right? This is a kind of a very good example of an alcoholic lie, because if you invert that sentence, you're basically saying, I drink almost every day. They're the same. I can't be an alcoholic because I don't drink every day is the same as saying, I drink most days, right? Or an alcoholic lie in the early stages of alcoholism, it might be something more like playing with semantics or changing the definitions in order to be favorable to yourself. The point of that is to kind of muddy the water just for the sake of obscuring the truth, just slightly, just enough to create plausible deniability. So if you are lying about how much you're drinking, or if you're telling small kind of sophisticated half-truths to diminish how much it appears that you are drinking, then you might have a problem. It doesn't have to be big lies. Okay, next one. This was a big one for me, and that is you take extra drinks or you secretly top up your drinks. It was huge for me. So there was a stage in my alcoholism when I was still able to be sociable. I'd be going to events and parties and nights out and that kind of thing. And when it was my turn to buy a round, I would often go to the bar and I would order 2 extra shots on top of the round that I was buying. And the first shot I would drink while the bar person was preparing the rest of them. And then I would drink the second shot after I'd paid and was taking it back. So for every round that I was drinking, I was secretly having 2 sneaky extra shots to myself. And that would accelerate over time, or even in the same evening, until every time I separated from my group and walked past the bar to go to the toilet, I would stop and have another shot and then return to the table. And it adds up. It accelerates really, really quickly. And the same is true of like secretly topping up your drinks when you think no one else is looking, or if you can get away with it. So I used to drink like whiskey quite a lot, especially socially. And I would hang around with other guys who liked to drink whiskey, and I would hold the bottle. And when I noticed their drinks were running out, I would finish my glass, top mine up, drink it again, top everybody else's up, and then top mine up again. And the result of that was I was essentially drinking twice as fast as everyone else. I was having 2 drinks for every one that they were having, because I was being sneaky with my own refills. And unless you were really paying attention to what I was doing, you probably wouldn't notice that I was drinking twice as much as everybody until I became twice as drunk. But you wouldn't notice that I was doing sneaky drinks. But if you're doing that, if you're adding drinks to a round that you're buying, or if you're secretly topping up your drinks, like if you go off to the kitchen at a house party and top it up when no one's around and then come back and then don't mention that you did it, this is alcoholic behavior and you might have a problem. Okay, the next one is joking about being an alcoholic. Calling yourself a wino and that kind of thing. I fucking hate this one, and I've seen it firsthand several times and done it as well. I did it for a while, especially in early sobriety, where I would make really tasteless jokes about like should we stop in the pub? Yeah. When people knew that I was in early recovery, I would make off-color jokes about wanting to go and drink a bottle of gin and stuff. And I think that was mostly to deflect the fear I had of admitting that I was struggling. I would make jokes about it because I was uncomfortable. But what I'm specifically talking about when I'm talking about joking about being an alcoholic is if you're the person that makes jokes that appear to be self-deprecating but are unintentionally revealing. Okay, so if you are part of a friend group and you introduce yourself by saying, I'm the drunk one, or I'm the alcoholic, or, I'm the wino of the group, whatever it is, there is probably a kernel of truth to it. Or if you make jokes about how you're always drunk, or if you throw in casually to a sentence that you can't remember your 20s or something because you were blackout drunk the whole time, all of that, which you're trying to pass off for humor, is actually a pretty serious red flag. And it happened to me recently in Germany. I was introducing an adult industry friend of mine to a client of mine, a group of clients, and I was trying to facilitate a relationship between them. And we sat down as a group in this nice kind of conference room, and he introduced himself as, "Hi, I'm a PR executive and a functioning alcoholic." And he didn't know that I was in recovery. And that was how he introduced himself. And I found myself boiling with anger inside. And he went on to drink 3 beers in the space of that hour-long meeting. It really sucked for me to hear him so flippantly say that and then drink 3 beers. And I pulled him aside afterwards. I didn't tell him that I was in recovery, but I wanted to get a sense of why he'd said that. And he kind of said in his half-German accent, "It is just a bit of German humor." But I could see through it. And I have since kind of gently pushed him towards sobriety. That kind of humor is hiding an insecurity. That's what it is. Anyway, if you're making weird, badly timed jokes about being an alcoholic, not only might you have a problem, but everybody around you probably already knows too. You're going to be the last one to find out. Okay, next up, you check the labels on alcohol bottles to make sure you're getting the most possible alcohol for the least amount of money. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I don't need to explain more than that because all of the alcoholics understand what I'm talking about. If you find yourself scanning the percentages on bottles and comparing it to the price on the liquor store shelf and trying to figure out what is the most alcohol molecules per dollar or whatever it is, then I think you have a rough time ahead of you. You're already thinking alcoholically. That is alkalogic. That is alcohol maths. And you're going to have a problem if you're thinking in those terms. Okay, next, you turn up late and already drunk to everything, and you alone think it is charming. Okay, so what I just described there, that was me for most of my 20s and the very first part of my 30s, where I had a reputation for doing exactly that, turning up late and drunk to any kind of social event. And I believed that it was charming and that I was kind of bohemian and interesting. And it was just part of my kind of brand, whatever that means, part of my legend. I would turn up already smelling of whiskey and my eyes already kind of glassy and glassed over and ready to have fun. And I'd be charming when I turned up. I'd be charismatic. And I did it so often that became expected of me. People would be like, "Where's Stu?" And someone would say, "Oh, he's probably got an event earlier. He'll be here in an hour already drunk." And then I would just burst in and be ready for fun. But the truth is that I was never at an earlier event. I used to lie about that and say that, sorry, I had this other thing, I had a few drinks, but I'm here now. But the actual truth of that situation is that I was pre-drinking alone, usually, to overcome my kind of shattering social anxiety. So when I turned up drunk and kind of charming, that's because an hour earlier I had been so nervous that I had to down a bottle of vodka before I could turn up and interact with other humans. So everybody saw this kind of extroverted, loud, kind of relatively charismatic person at social events. So everybody thought I was that person. But in fact, I was nervous and awkward and introverted. I was a wreck, and I had to hide behind a very thick mask of alcohol in order to operate in social settings. And I didn't learn that until I got sober. Now, you can get away with that kind of behavior for a couple of years in your 20s. You can probably style that out. But a lot of us make it our identity. And if that's what you're doing, if that turning up drunk and late is part of your identity, you're likely going to have a serious problem. And it can be cute when you're 24, I guess. But after 35, it stops being charming and it becomes kind of gross. I don't say that maliciously. I'm talking about myself here. I was gross when it stopped being charming. At some point, when my hair started receding, I think there's a direct correlation there. But it became kind of creepy, and I'm afraid that might be you too. So you're welcome. Okay, next is another really big one, and that is you've started hiding the evidence. So most of us know the stereotype of alcoholics hiding drinks around, like in the toilet cistern or in the glove compartment of the car, whatever. Alcoholics hide drinks so that they always have a drink available. But less discussed is hiding the empties and hiding the evidence of your drinking. And for me, I think that is a more serious warning sign. Because if you're hiding your drinks, that indicates that you always need a drink, right? That's obvious. But if you're hiding the empties and hiding the evidence, that indicates that you are guilty about it. And I think that's worse. And of course, it's very natural to try to convince yourself that you're just tidying up, putting the empties in the bin. But if I had to wager, I would bet that the way you're doing it is you're stuffing the empties right at the bottom of the bin and then covering them so that a casual glance won't reveal the level of your drinking. Or you're ditching them away from the crime scene, I suppose, for lack of a better phrase. You're kind of putting them in bins in other people's bins, or taking them out with you in a backpack and littering them in like public bins, that kind of thing. That's what I did. When I was living alone, even when I was living alone, I did that. I would accumulate a week's worth of vodka and whiskey bottles, like 10 bottles. And then over the course of a couple of days, I would like when Andy Dufresne is shuffling the wall from his prison cell out onto the baseball field, out down his trouser leg. I was doing that around Cornwall. I'd go out with a backpack full of empty bottles and just leave them in bushes, and as I wandered around or in bins, just scatter them. That was my strategy. And if you're doing stuff like that, you might have a problem. And the reason why that I think is such a massive red flag, hiding the evidence is such a massive red flag, is because when I was doing it, I was living alone. And there was not really any reason for me to hide it from other people. I think part of the process of hiding the empties is that you're hiding it from yourself. You don't have to witness the depth of your own problem. Out of sight, out of mind. If you can't see the evidence of your drinking, then perhaps it's not that bad. But no. If you are, instead of tidying them up, if what you're doing is actively hiding them or concealing them in any way, you have a problem. Okay, the next one is a little difficult to explain, but if you know what I'm talking about, then you'll understand. And that is that you are constantly mathing out how much alcohol you have drunk versus how much you have left. You're obsessed with how much alcohol you have left. And it doesn't matter whether you have like a single glass in front of you or you have a cabinet full of spirits and liquors and stuff. It's always on your mind how much you have left. And even while you're drinking, you'll be thinking about buying more. Okay, so if you have a drink in your hand and you look at it and you think, I'm not sure this is going to be enough, there is your problem. That is alcoholic behavior creeping in. Let me rephrase. So if you are planning to get more while you have alcohol in your hand, that's a problem. Okay, so I'm overgeneralizing slightly. There is a chance you're just out with your friends and you're like, I might need another glass of wine in a minute. I'm talking about the feeling that you need to do it, rather than the kind of thought that you need to do it. A feeling that I might run out, I have to make sure that I never have zero. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, next, another quite a big one, I think, that was certainly big for me, is that you are annoyed when people are not drinking. Need to explain this one as well. Okay, so as my alcoholism progressed, I found it crucial to be around other big drinkers. I needed other people's drinking to not just validate mine, but also kind of obfuscate it. I needed everybody to be drunk in order to kind of cover up the fact that I was the drunkest. I needed other people around me drinking recklessly so that no one would be focused on my reckless drinking. And I would seek them out. I made terrible friends when I was an alcoholic. In Shanghai, I have to be careful not to give too much away, but I made friends with an Australian helicopter pilot who was one of the worst people I've ever met in my life. I hated him. He was racist and he was violent and he was disgusting in a lot of different ways, but he was an alcoholic. And we had that in common. And I would go and I would be excited to see him, even though I knew that I would have a terrible time with him. Anyway, look, if you go to an event, if you are drinking, if you're starting to wonder if you have a problem, and you go to a social event and you discover that everybody there is a fully well-rounded, emotionally stable adult who is not getting smashed, and that makes you angry, you have a problem. The next one, a small one, you have Googled a phrase like, "What are the early signs of alcoholism?" Some variation of that phrase. And as a sober person, I am obligated by the rules and the regulations of the International Sober Committee to say the following sentence: if you are worried that you have a problem, you have a problem. And finally, as far as my own alcoholism goes at least, you started negotiating with the alcohol. That is to say, you started making little bargains and setting little rules. For example, if I don't drink tonight, I can then drink on Friday. Or, I'll go out tonight, I'll only have 3 drinks, and then I'll come home. That kind of thing. And if you have started bargaining or making rules, then you're already at a disadvantage and you might already have a problem. And there's 2 things that I want to say about that. The first is that in that negotiation between you and alcohol, you are at a disadvantage. The alcohol is the one that has the power in that negotiation for a million different reasons, too many to enumerate here. I'll just leave it at that. And the second one, if you're setting little rules for yourself, for example, I'll only drink on Friday this week, and then you go on to break them, you start to normalize breaking those rules, and it gets worse and worse and worse after that. You lose more and more power to alcohol once you start doing that. So if you're negotiating with alcohol, saying things like, well, if I don't drink for the next 2 weeks, then I can drink at that wedding. Or if I drink at that wedding, then I won't drink for the next 2 weeks, whatever variation of it is. And if you're setting little rules for yourself, and then certainly if you are breaking those rules, then you definitely have a problem. Okay, so what did I miss? What other really good signs and indicators, subtle ones, did I miss in this video? Please do leave it in the comments. Of course, like and subscribe if you are so inclined. And if you would like to contribute more and have a slightly more active relationship with this channel, please go and visit the Patreon and see what's going on over there. Thank you for watching. And as always, good luck out there.